everybody. Hey, this is Tony Dunn. I'm the senior pastor here at New Day Christian Fellowship. I'm also the bishop over the New Day Global Network of Churches, and welcome to Listen Up. I have guests today here, and they're going to introduce themselves in a moment, but I thought it really would be beneficial, especially during this time of social unrest and all the challenges that we're experiencing in our country and all over the world, that we really take time to listen to one another. You know, the book of James tells us that we need to be slow to speak and quick to hear. So I pray that you would listen up today and have 3 police officers here. I just noticed that no one is really asking them how they are doing, what their concerns are, what their experiences are with this. And so we have 3 great men here today. And so first we have Minister Sean. Minister Sean, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, your career, and who you serve for?
Yeah. I'm a law enforcement officer, been in law enforcement for approximately 13 years, and worked with law enforcement for many years prior to that. I guess combined to be about 22 years working security and law enforcement, and then also working for 2 different agencies. I worked for the Riverside County Sheriff Department for approximately 6 years, and then had an opportunity to work now with the UC system, the State of California Police Department, in the city of Riverside. So been married 22 years to an amazing woman who is a county employee, works in social services, and 2 amazing sons, one who is on his way to college this year on a full ride scholarship, and another who's just completed his sophomore year in high school.
Awesome. Now, what do you do with on the force?
I'm currently a detective with the Crime Prevention Unit at the University of Riverside. And I just took over that position recently. I have been on patrol for several years, and just really having an opportunity to work with youth in that department. I have about 40 employees that are working under my care right now, and they're student employees, and they, are pretty much the eyes and ears of the university throughout the evenings and also into the wee hours of the morning.
And also, too, we have Detective John Warren. Tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Warren. I am currently a detective for a large city police department. I've been a part of the department for 33 years. I grew up in South Central LA and wanted to become a police officer to give back to my community. During my time with the police department, I've worked many duties, including patrol. I was sergeant of a gang unit and some small units. I'm married to my childhood sweetheart and have 2 boys who are currently in college.
All right, amen. All right, Officer Brandon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Green, and I'm also a member of a large county sheriff's department. I've been married for 12 years. And I've been a part of the department for 15 years. My current assignment is with the mental evaluation team, which encompasses crisis negotiations, suicide prevention, and the location of people who suffer from autism and Asperger's.
All right, thank you, sir. And children?
Yes, children, I have 2 boys and 1 girl, 14, 12, and 6.
Okay, all right. Detective, I want to start with you. Detective John, tell me just this civil unrest, how are you managing this? How are you doing emotionally with all of this?
Well, my first thought is that it's really not about me. It's about a movement to make 2 Americas, 1 America. I'm saddened by much of the rioting I see, much of the unrest, but I also understand that these are the births of change. And so in that way, I'm grateful. I'm happy for this change because I think it's been a long time coming.
Okay, all right. Detective Sean, how are you doing with this? How are you doing emotionally? How are you feeling?
I am, I'm glad there's an awareness to what took place. Obviously, we all know, everybody that saw it knew that it was a tragic situation, should have never happened. Untrained acts like that don't belong in the profession. The flip side of it for me is I'm very disappointed, with with some of what's happening around us. I felt, as I spoke to a couple of other officers before, that we were moving in a much better direction in terms of officers kind of spending time with young people in the communities, playing basketball with them. You see it all over the internet, Facebook, and so I figured we were moving in a better direction. To have this happen, it kind of pulled the hearts out of many people, crushed them, made them feel a certain kind of way, and then it went from being just a terrible, brutal act to turning into a racist kind of climate. And I'm not sure that was the answer to the issue. I think it was a brutality issue, but I will say that maybe some disappointment in just watching, especially my faith-based community. They say, you put a person under pressure and you find out what comes out. And so I think a lot of people are handling it and experiencing it, and a lot of their true feelings that were internal are now coming out all over social media. Not that it's always a bad thing, but I think it's important that people realize that we have a role to play in this. There was this time, many pastors, I think, spoke to their congregations, preparing them for this moment, and it's time for us to step up as faith walkers and do what God called us to do in the earth.
Okay, I appreciate that. Brandon, tell me how you're doing emotionally.
I'm a bit saddened by the events that took place in regards to the situation with Mr. Floyd. I 100% disagree with the tactics that were done, especially by all of the officers, in particular the officer that had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's what we are not about. Here in Southern California, our tactics aren't that way. And in the event we do see someone doing something that is against policy, for me, speaking for myself, I am the one to intervene, to say, hey, don't do that, reposition yourself. If this person says that they are having some sort of medical issue, once again, going by policy, turning them over to their side, checking their airway, their breathing, their circulation, getting the fire department or the paramedics to respond, along with the supervisor, things of that nature. But with all that being said, very sad about what took place in Minneapolis. But at the same time, too, with the protests, I support, the protests that are taking place across the country, because I'm a firm believer that there does need to be change. We do need to address the issues within our law enforcement community in relation to our relationships with the public. And the ultimate goal is just to, enhance the quality of service, but most importantly, our relationships with the residents in the communities that we serve.
Well, you guys tell me, and Detective John, I'll start with you. Yeah. As an African American, what is that like for you? Because now you with the African American community being up in uproar, and this is not our first rodeo in terms of
Sure.
with Mr. Floyd, and I love not our first rodeo, but also too, you're dealing with the community, but you're also a black man within an organization. How is that for you?
Being a police officer first is tough. Probably one of the best ways I heard it described is you get into an elevator, and that elevator goes, and you don't know what floor it's going to stop on. It could be very top, maybe someone very affluent, or down at the very bottom, or somewhere in between, and you don't know exactly what you're going to get. So that's a good way to describe being a police officer in general. Being a black man, being a police officer, I long for better community enactment. It's tough being called Uncle Tom, when we go down, and when I grew up in that same neighborhood, it's tough to do that. But then again, you have to understand the historical side of it. When we're talking about police brutality as a whole, you can see the domino effect that all this is having, and it's come to this point. So being a black man, I understand the feelings that my black people have, I have those same feelings. When I look at my own police department, I see a mentality of us versus them. And I think we need to make great strides and
when you said us versus them, make sure I'm clear.
Yeah.
You're talking about the police are feel like is them against society or them against the community, or is it is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay,
So,
got it. Okay.
So, being a police officer is a violent job sometimes. And so you often stay at this point where the light is always red, right? We have green, yellow, red, relax, and often you're at this point where it's always red. And so you're always on the defensive. You're always looking for the worst that can happen. And we prepare for that. We prepare that with training and so forth. So the problem is, and I do have a suggested solution. One thing is maybe roll calls. Maybe we have our roll calls. We roll call every day. Maybe
What's a roll call? What do you mean?
A roll call is when we first start our watch, we all come together and we talk about what happened prior watch and maybe the days before, and then we talk about what our assignments are and what we're going to try to accomplish this day. And that would be a great thing to have within our communities. We can go to a park or maybe a shopping center, and we can have the community sit next to us as we're having roll call. I think that would help erase the us against them mentality.
Got it. I was hearing Minister Sean said earlier about really connecting in the community, and then right before we started filming, Brandon, you mentioned pretty much the same thing about it. It would be great if we can do more like playing with the kids, playing basketball, get in the street and play football with them, and really connect with them at a deeper level. Mm-hmm. So, Detective Sean, tell me, you as an African American male, how is that being on the police force for you?
Different. No. Yeah, it's honestly, I think that one of the things that's interesting is being a kid from Compton, grew up in Compton and Linwood, and had some experiences. We kind of knew what to expect from law enforcement when they came to town. I think I don't think I really focused so much on what they were, what color they were at the time. I'm sure my father probably had more of an experience with focusing on the color of their skin more than I did. I was just a kid from the inner city. But being a law enforcement officer now, as I've embarked on my journey with it, I feel that it at times has been troubling for me because kind of like what Detective John Warren said is that, you kind of feel like you have to, make sure you conduct yourself a certain way. Because I know for us, it's like you come from a different background. Everybody's looking to see how you're going to respond, act to various things. It hasn't been a huge issue for me. I'm just going to be very transparent with that. I pretty much feel comfortable in my skin. I'm pretty outspoken. Most of the guys that I've worked with from different backgrounds, different races, they pretty much know I'm going to say what's on my mind. So you get that up front. But more importantly, I think that one of the things that I think it was kind of interesting, he brought up roll call in the community. I think it's if I was in roll call and I was a civilian, I would kind of listen as I do now as a law enforcement officer. I think going to roll call, one of the things I remember a lot of when I first became a law enforcement on patrol was how many of the suspects were minorities. And that really affected me. That bothered me really bad because I would go home and I talk to my wife about the fact that black male adult, Hispanic male adult, black male adult, Hispanic male adult, black male adult, Hispanic, and that really.
All right, officer, you lost me.
Yeah.
Male adult, what's that?
Well, that is when you're sitting in roll call and you hear that the suspect that we're looking for that committed a specific crime. That's what you hear. It's a black male adult, approximately this height.
I'm sorry, you said male adult.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So when you hear that, I guess my diction is not very, but no, I think when you hear that over and over again, and you're a black man from the inner city, if that doesn't bother you, something's wrong. I mean, I feel like that concerns me. I want to see men coming from my community that are helping older women at the gas station, not taking their debit cards and punching them in the face and taking their car. I want to see men that come from my background that are helping, assisting the old lady across the street. And so as a black man sitting in briefing, hearing that, and I'm the only black guy in most settings that I'm sitting in, it's uncomfortable. So that was probably, and then obviously what he stated is very fair, I think, for each of us, is coming from the inner city, being from Compton or South Central, as Brandon knows too, is that you're Uncle Tom, you're a sellout, you're a coon, and that kind of breeds a behavior that makes you feel like you have to say and do certain things, even amongst your peers, that you shouldn't have to say. Because I believe once you kind of turn it over to God and you kind of give your life over, your speech changes, your demeanor changes, your issues and the way that you respond to those issues change.
So tell me something, and thank you for that, opening up like that. So it's difficult in the community, you've been a police officer, and being a black African-American in the community, the way you're rated. Now, let me ask you, have you had some other officers, black African-American officers, you being a little bit more outspoken or thinking differently than they do? Has that occurred where that's been a challenge for you?
I can only think of one particular incident when I was working for the sheriff department, and the sheriff department obviously is a huge department because they cover a wide span area. But I was working court services in City of Riverside. I was working with a guy, I won't speak his name, but he's a white guy, and mentioned something to me about how cool I was being with the inmates, and he's basically saying and he was kind of sort of training me in his specific courtroom. And he mentioned something about, you're gonna learn how to deal with them, because you're too nice. You kind of gotta. I said, well, personally, I I know how to deal with them, and for you to try to act tough with them, this is specifically what I said to him. For you to try to act tough with them, they pretty much already know who you are without the badge and the gun on anyway. So you might as well save that drama for someone else, because I don't feel like I have to put up a facade for him. I'm going to treat him straight until he shows me different. That's not always comfortable, or it's not going to work for everybody. I'm not going to lie to you. I am kind of 6'2", 230. It's a little bit different than a guy who's maybe 5'7" and doesn't have the connection with the community. So I wouldn't recommend that everybody. My wife and I talk about this all the time. You can't recommend that every race of people deal with the people that you used to dealing with the same way. It's just not reality.
So, Brandon, let me ask you, as an African-American, how's it been? But also, too, if you can share with me, have you ever had a situation where you got a partner or somebody that you're in a disagreement with? How did you handle that?
So, in regards to the community and the department, as a black man, it feels like it's like two families at odds. In one respect, you have a community where I come from, Compton, where most residents are proud of me that, I'm a deputy sheriff, but then there's a small percentage that aren't. And, sometimes they think that, I'm an Uncle Tom, and other derogatory terms. But then on another hand, like we were talking about earlier with our departments, sometimes there's ego problems, and you have to learn how to intervene or check that particular person who's having that ego issue. For instance, there was a time where, I worked with a partner, and we were patrolling a certain area, and there was a black man walking with his young daughter. She had to have been around 3 or 4 years old, and he was sagging his pants. That particular partner of mine took it upon himself to say, pull your pants up in an aggressive tone in front of several people, and it's kind of embarrassing this guy. As a result of that, the guy became upset and wanted to confront my partner. I intervened. The way I intervened is I turned to my partner and said, hey man, you can't tell this guy to pull his pants up just because he's sagging. It's not a crime, you're embarrassing this guy, number one, in front of his young daughter and in front of all these people, you know. As the day went on, you know, we continued to have another conversation, and obviously my partner wasn't happy about that. And he gave me an ultimatum.
Okay.
Which was, if I can't back him up in this particular situation, then him and I don't need to work together. So I said, fine, I'll take you to the station right now, which I did. But in turn, I also, you know, let a supervisor know, say, hey, this is what's going on. You guys might want to keep an eye on that.
Okay.
So,
Detective John, tell me, what role does ego play in a cop's life?
Ego is big. You know, when you're confronted with a situation and it could be violent, you have to know you're going to win, and that requires a certain amount of ego. The trouble comes when you turn it off. So let me take you through a typical interaction.
Please.
Right. So I see you, and I get a call. Someone saw you looking into buildings. They have a suspicion that you may be up to some sort of crime. Right. So I get the call. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to order you to do a few things, and these are all for safety. I'm going to say, stop, put your hands up, turn around, spread your legs, cross your fingers on top of your head or behind your back. I'm going to come up, I'm going to squeeze your fingers, and I'm going to search you. Now, that's fine. That I want people to understand. That's education
Hang on
for
a
the
second.
public.
I just had a flashback right then when he said that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I want everyone to
ahead.
understand that is standard operating procedure for safety. For safety. We don't know who you are, and of course, if you're Joe Citizen and you're innocent, you're going to think, oh, why, what? And then if you already don't like the police, you're going to like, well, no, I'm not doing that. I know my rights, and so we already have a conflict, right? But really, ideally, what the officer should be doing is he should be establishing safety, and from there, he needs to turn it off. He needs to become human. Sir, we got a call. This is why I'm here. Can you tell me your name? Someone observed someone that matches your description, wearing the same, handkerchief, looking to things. I just moved in. I live around the corner. All right. Probably 75% of the time, that's what's occurring. But the trouble comes in from the law enforcement side is when they don't turn it off. And so we're talking about ego there, all right? And so ego has a very big role in the police department because now you go work a specialized unit. Say you work in a gang unit, or say you work in SWAT, right? And now this same type of ego comes in, and you have this us against them mentality. And now what happens is this breeds racism. This breeds separatism. And so it takes strong leadership. It takes strong individual maturity for these officers to overcome that witness. Example now, our SWAT teams, and I'm sure this is true across the country, predominantly white. Well, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go into a situation, barricaded suspect, and they may have to kill someone. 9 times out of 10, that person may be of color. And you don't have diversity. You don't have maybe someone who could bring a change of view, a paradigm change, and maybe stop this thing. So there's a reason that we say systemic, because the history of police department, and I have to say this, that just by wearing the uniform, what happened in Minneapolis, we're guilty by association. And we have to recognize that. We wear a uniform, we're guilty, but at the same time, we have to understand, accept that the systemicness within policing has got to end. It's got to stop. I've been a member of our department for 33 years. I've met some great people, and I want to make sure that you understand this. By and far, most police officers are good people. They love people. But then you have few, and you have this systemic system that's in place that treats people poorly. And those things have to change.
Go ahead, Brandon, because please.
To add just a bit on it, when it comes to contacting people, obviously we're here, but just like a plane how it descends prior to landing, we bring it down a notch. And a part of that would be just to explain to the person, why we're doing what we're doing. And like Mr. Warren said, it's all safety based. We don't know who you are. You could be the best person in the world, but then again, something may be afoot. We don't know. We're walking into a situation, in so many words, with limited information, and we have to make sure that we are the ones that are controlling it for everyone's safety around. But I think one of the key points when it comes to contacting people, is just merely explaining to them why we're doing what we're doing, or why we did what we did. That way they can have a better understanding, like, okay, you put me in handcuffs, or you're detaining me because, A, B, and C. Giving them a level of understanding on why we're doing something versus contacting you, jamming you up, putting you in cuffs, either putting you in the backseat or on the curb, and then just walking away. That doesn't leave people with a good feeling.
Right.
A quick explanation would be suffice, to say the least. Sure. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. It's everything that's been said. It's very interesting when you walk into situations like that, and I think that's kind of the biggest thing that probably going forward is going to be discussed quite often, is the fact that when officers walk into situations, when you show up to a situation, and now they're being ambushed all over the country, and there's I have an alert that comes on my phone when officers are killed in line of duty. Just between January and now, it's been unbelievable, the number of officers who lost their lives in the line of duty. It's happening a lot. Between 18 and 19 was crazy, and you just don't hear about it. You don't hear about it. It's unfair. However, so I feel like, kind of what Brandon just stated earlier, I kind of feel like my heart is in two places, because I feel like that I know, as Detective Warren was just saying, that the large majority of the officers that I've worked with and you see that you're working with, they're great guys. Their families, their kids. You back each other. You discuss, hey man, I'm going to switch a day. Just different things that you're able to do, no matter what race or background they come from. Guys are usually pretty genuinely fair and cool to work with. But there is a small percentage of guys out there, and the toughest part for me, which I know we'll eventually get to, is realizing that when we're looking at change and fixing the problem, egos are going to be in every profession, no matter who you are. Yes, we have the ability to take life or freedom. I had a gentleman that I actually pulled over in Riverside in 2014, somewhere around there. Pulled him over, older black gentleman. The car was, just some tags. And some people say, well, why'd you pull him over? Well, his tags were, And then I pulled him over, and once I found out who's in the car, is an older black gentleman, old enough to be my dad, and looked like a nice guy, but he was driving an older Lexus. The car was kind of beat up. Obviously, I don't have to go into warning signs and things we see on a car that generate, your interest, but I was also training with a guy. So I look at him and I see it, pull him out. He's in the car. I get his ID. Once I get his ID, I found out he had a felony warrant for his arrest, which means I'm basically mandated to take him in, right? Once I deal with the guy, I talk to him, I immediately go back to the car, ask him to step out. Could you step out of the vehicle for me, please? My partner's on the other side of the vehicle. Put him in the cuffs, take him to the station, start processing. I'm processing me. I go up to him. I said, hey, man, as I told you on the street, I had to take you in. I know you stated to me already, because he gave me a lot of conversations, just saying I'm starting to get myself together, trying to change the tide. And I said, and I get it, and I understand. I said, but you understand the position that I was in. He said, man, you know what? Don't worry about it. I got myself into this situation. I'm going to have to get myself out. It's my past record. And I think sometimes we kind of forget that the major part of what we're seeing around the country is not so much what the law enforcement officer is doing bad. is a lot of what we're seeing in the inner city that we have to correct ourselves. And I think that's going to be huge going forward, because in many professions, you know, you got bad bankers, you got bad real estate agents, you got bad cops, you got bad, you know, whatever you want to call it. Before they change, you pretty much are going to have to adjust. And I think that that's key. I think we have to adjust because we're having people from our communities face these men in uniform every day, but yet they don't know how to even deal with authority in the first place, not just for police departments, but the school campus, the instructional aide, the proctor on campus working, teachers are getting hit in the face. These things are not cop-based related. These things are an authoritative issue.
You know, if you can, and I want all three of you to speak with this, but I'll stay with you for right now, Detective Sean. Because your wife is in social work, and I know what she sees, and then you guys come home and you talk, and I know this is such a huge deal, but I want to talk about the family right now. How is it for you, and how do you help your family be okay? You know, and then you have your sons, and what are you communicating with them? You know, and so I'm sure when your wife sees you going off to work, and you know she's praying, and but how do you help balance that, and then how do you help your sons as they're coming up into this world?
That's a loaded question, Bishop. No, it's funny. I've been on a few different platforms since this incident occurred, with people asking me to come and talk about a few things, and I'm sure I've ruffled some feathers with the idea of that I haven't had the quote unquote real conversation with my sons about police. I've had the conversation with them about how to conduct themselves. Period. I think the best way for us to teach our kids is to model for them. And I feel like that as a man, as a father, as a husband, my dad did that. My father didn't have a talk with me. We were well past the whole 60s, 50s era where innocent men, I say that very strongly, innocent men who were good husbands and fathers, who lived at home with their wives, who were not, you know, kind of working in the streets. They were being beat for nothing. So we were past that point in our time of growing up in the city. But he never had the talk with me. He just expected that when I left the house that I was going to conduct myself in such a way. And he was right. I didn't have many run-ins with the police department or officers or whatever. What I've done is the same thing with my son because I felt like it worked with me. I turned out okay. And so with my sons, we have conversations about how they to present when they step out. I did a little docu video with my sons, a 6-minute docu video a couple of years ago with my sons, basically showing the difference in a man with, you know, a father present and a man who does not. And the docu was pretty interesting because it kind of showed, you know, a guy walking out of the house, and the father's directing him to take his hood off his head, take his earphones off so he can hear. Take your hood off so you can see around you, your peripheral. Now, the interesting part about that video is that I had a lot of different pieces in it, or working parts, where it was some quotes posted up of different reasons why it's important for us to rear the kids and to not necessarily have a dramatic conversation about how bad professions are, but really talk to them about how to conduct themselves when they step out in public. But when I went back and watched it, what I noticed is that I had a flashback, like you did a few minutes ago, where I remember being a kid in the inner city, and I had more issues with the city of people that I grew up around, and the fights and the physical altercations and the arguments that I had to deal with way more than I ever had contact with cops. And I think that that's key, because I believe that our kids' concern, what I'm talking to my sons, I want my sons to be aware of the wiles of the world. I believe that the wiles of the world, they're going to face much more than they're going to face a man in uniform.
All right. Detective Warren?
All right. I want to say again, I love my brother Sean. I truly love you, man, but we have a disagreement here. You know, I would probably be more inclined to lean that way prior to two things. The first thing is that we have a leader in our nation that is divisive. And with that divisiveness, he's emboldened a lot of people to come bring the evil out into the light. And with this prolific use of video cameras, where I thought that maybe there were isolated incidents of police brutality. What I'm seeing now is that police brutality has been there all along. It's just now being captured. It's just now being brought out into the light. And I'm seeing more and more of that. And we can list the names right here, but we won't do that. I know my own encounters with police officers. Always with ego. I've been pulled out of my car. This is when I was a young man. Searched through my car, on my knees, left there, just leave, and they, without saying anything else, leaving me to clear out my car.
And Brandon said they ought to give you some kind of explanation or say something, and they didn't do that.
All right, yeah, and I think this is more common than we realize. With that, I want my sons to live, so I tell them to cowl down to police officers. If you're being stopped, yes, sir, no, sir, it's not just respectful. It's don't raise their anger. Don't raise their ego, because they're very powerful. And any issues you have, son, we can take care of it later. Just live this encounter. Live through this encounter. And I'm just saying, and yes, it may be sparse that this is going to happen, but it's out there. And so they have to be ready for that. I have 2 teenage boys that, they're boys, they're young men. And, they're bound to be stopped. Sometimes just for the fact that they are black. What I want to tell them is, and what I tell them all the time is to do that. But when I tell them to cowl down, I get this look on their face like, why? Because they've grown up here. We brought them out to the suburbs, and they're somewhat sheltered. And the look of why, and I have to tell them that this same sort of ego existed for our forefathers. It's of the slave master. You couldn't yell out when they were raping your sisters and your mother. And so this is where the hatred in the black community comes from. Historically, police officers have been the slave masters. And we're trying to change that, and we're going forward. But sometimes we got to take a step back to go forward.
Brandon, you not only do you have 2 boys, well, like Detective John's, his sons are in college, but your 2, they're what's Kaylin? Is high school yet?
Yep.
Oh, high school, and then Jordan is
7th
grade. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
But then you got
daughter.
that little one. You got to see his daughter. She is something, boy. In fact, that's gonna be she's gonna be the president. Oh, go ahead.
Hope so. In regards to this is, I teach my sons, obviously to be respectful to law enforcement, but to everyone. And when they find themselves in a situation with law enforcement, quite honestly, I'm a firm believer in recording things because it holds everybody accountable. The person that's being contacted and also the officer. But let's take it even further. People who make allegations against people of color that aren't law enforcement and decide to, produce these mini theatrical performances over
The
phones.
name be called Karen?
You said it. You said it.
Okay.
But yes.
The Karens, okay.
But in that regard, recording the incident from beginning to end, it just holds. It's a digital witness, is what I call it. So in case if that Karen wants to say whatever she wants to say, great. Soaking it all up on this camera. So when it comes to the time where law enforcement comes, they can just look at that camera and say, okay, you're lying. I think that is also another key to, preventing, these false allegations and curtailing it.
And don't think Karens don't happen to black police officers. It happens towards black police officers.
So, going back to, my children, especially my daughter, she's 6, but as she gets older, like Minister San said, I try to model for my children on how to conduct themselves through my actions. I can tell them a number of things, but what I'm most concerned about is them watching what my feet and my hands are doing, because that's where the truth is coming from.
That's good. That's good.
And that's how I go about teaching them, as well as Tamika,
How does Tamika feel about you being a police officer? What are some of her concerns?
Tamika has a really good poker face, to say the least. I know she does have concerns, especially within the last weeks with the riots. She cried and gave me a long hug. She didn't want to let me go. But she's a God-fearing woman, and she places her confidence and her faith in the Lord and Him keeping me as I go to and from my travels. So I think she holds onto Him very dearly, and prays for me. And that's what I'm grateful for. I have a wife that actually prays for me and keeps me and has God keep me away from evil. And when people come to me, God just blesses me with the right things to say at that particular time.
That really blesses me right there. And so, in fact, I want to close with this with you guys. So your faith, how do you live out your faith at work, John? What does that look like for you on a day-to-day basis, the practical part of it? Because honestly, guys, the reason I have these guys here is because often we don't consider how difficult a job that they actually have. We don't even really pay attention to them until we have something like the Minneapolis thing. And these guys, it's a tough situation. So faith, how do you live it out?
I live my faith by example. We have to rise above. As police officers, they say you have to live above. You're required to be at a different level. Well, as a Christian, you're required to be even higher than that, and strive to be and live like Jesus Himself. I can tell you that my faith is cleansing. Pastor, Bishop, when I hear you speak, it cleanses and renews my mind. The things that I see at work, quick example is when you come home, you have this closet and you see some horrible, terrible things in our profession. And you throw that in the closet, close the door, go see your family. And you do that day after day after day. And then one day, you go to stow something up there and everything comes tumbling down on you. It's tough. We're not meant to see this type of evil. What my faith does is it cleanses me. It rebuilds me. It renews me.
Amen. Amen. Minister Sean, you want to close us out?
I have a disagreement with Mr. Warren here too. I don't leave it in the closet. I leave it in the locker room before I leave. Before I leave the station. I try to at least. It comes home with me sometimes. It follows, but no. It pretty much dictates everything I am, Bishop. Everything. My decision making, everything that you've heard me talk about here on this platform today is basically centered off my center, the way I vote, the way I look at life, the way I see people, the way I deal with people. And we talked about our sons a few minutes ago. I think it's big because my number one concern in my faith walk is that my sons won't follow my lead when they step out the house. Not who they're going to run into, but mainly that my teaching or my faith walk was not exemplary enough for them to make a quality decision in a rough situation. So for me, it's really the fabric of me and my family. Joshua 24, as for me and my house, I feel very strongly about that, passionate about that. And I make sure that, as he said, that's my example. I don't only walk it, I talk it. People know my department. I've been in 2 departments, and both of them knew where I stood and what I stood for. And so it is everything I am and everything I'm going to be till I leave this place and go take my dirt nap.
Dirt nap. Well, First of all, I want to say thank you to you guys. I appreciate you taking time out to share your transparency, and I just appreciate your service. I've said that to you guys before. I think the general public knows how I feel about police officers. I've been stopped at least 18 times. I think I stopped counting then, and some of those encounters have not been good. But I purpose to guard my heart, and I recognize greatness when I see it. Thank you guys for just supporting the public and the great job that you do. In my humble opinion, you're underpaid and underappreciated. I think we need more recognition of you. You need more support. I heard this defund the police department. No way, Jose. No, yeah, I can understand restructuring and some things, but you guys are vital, and I really appreciate you. Hey, family, I want to encourage you guys. I want you to pray for the police officers. Pray for those that are in authority. That's what the Word of God tells us to do. And if you could, I know it's difficult right now, especially for minorities. And I know even a lot of my Caucasian friends, you guys are afraid, you guys are concerned. I get all of that. But we have to get back to the cross. That's the answer for everything. We have to get back to the cross. The Word of God tells us to pray for these guys. And I want you to do that, okay? Pray for them. Pray for their wives. Pray for their children. Just pray for their well-being, okay? God bless you. Love you. And I pray that you had ears to hear what the Spirit of God was saying today.